Hey, FBJ, we're so glad that you have tuned in with us for this new thing that we're doing, this live webinar that we've entitled Navigating Your New Normal. We have some of our counselors from our Summit Counseling Ministry here at First Baptist Jackson who are going to be meeting with me every Tuesday at 2 o'clock just to kind of discuss things related to this weird time that we're in. Answering questions that you may have about just how life is, well, it's changed over the last few weeks. And so I want to let you know, if you're tuning in today on Facebook, you can go to the comment section on Facebook and you can send us a question. If you're on First Jackson TV, you can go to the chat section and you can send us a question. I do want to remind you that your profile name may come up, and so just make sure you remember that when you send a question in. It may be that other people can see your questions. I just want you to be mindful of that. But we really encourage you to ask questions that you have, questions on your mind that you would like for these counselors to discuss, questions about your children, questions about how to help them with school or how to help them with some of the things that they're worried about. Questions that you may have about issues that are popping up in marriage or work, or just some of the questions that you have about life, the anxieties that you're experiencing. This is for you. This is a way for us to be able to minister to you right where you are. And so you will help us by sending us questions. Those questions will come in to my cell phone. You'll notice that I'll be looking down a little bit, and that's because I'm looking at those questions, and then I'll ask those to our guests. Now today we have two special guests with us. This is Lisa Sorey and Shannon Collins, both of them, of course, with Summit Counseling. And I want to ask each of them just to kind of share with you a little bit about their specialties in counseling. So Lisa, we'll begin with you.
Okay, well, someone told me a long time ago that I'm really a generalist because I love everybody, and I do. I love to work with women, but I love to work with couples. I have worked a lot with people experiencing grief, and it's all over the place. Eating disorders, really you name it, anxiety, depression. Just ask me and I'll love on you.
Yeah. Shannon?
I have been at First Baptist for about 12 years with a gap in between being at home, and I primarily work with families and with individual counseling, like women, young girls, college-age students, teenagers, and then sometimes bringing in the whole family system with that. I really do more of that than I do marital counseling. I do that, but I really do more of the family and really enjoy that dynamic.
Yeah, great. So both of you have experience in family counseling. So let's talk about a couple of general things as we wait for questions to come in. One is, every time you turn on the TV, there's something new going on, COVID-19. I mean, it's a 24-hour news cycle, and you can just kind of get caught up in watching it, and the more you watch, it seems the more worried you become.
Sure.
Yes.
And you know, we don't think a lot of times about our kids, you know, because as mom and dad are just watching news to stay informed, a lot of times kids are in the room and they're watching, or at least they're hearing some of the same things. What advice would you give, particularly to parents, about being careful about what our children are watching, or maybe is there such a thing as too much information?
Sure.
Yes.
Well, I'll just say, Shannon, I'm sorry, because you know I'm the pushy, bossy one. So I'll just tell y'all that, one, there's that old saying, little pictures have big ears. It's an old country saying. And so kids do hear way more and sense way more than we realize. And so it's great to be cautionary on that. But at my house, we're doing with the news is just budgeting our time. In other words, setting a boundary with how much we listen to. Because it's going to be repeated. We're not going to miss anything. But Shannon, I know you probably have wiser words.
I agree. I think that I was sharing with you earlier, Chip, that I noticed myself being at home this weekend, watching it more and feeling more anxiety myself, and having to turn it off and say, whew, that's enough. And I've been saying that to my family, and particularly people who are home all the time. that you just can't watch it. You have to be able to set a boundary, move and do something different, go outside for a little while, something to get your mind off of it, because even people who do not struggle with anxiety feel anxiety when that's put in front of them over and over again. And with our kids, I think that we assume that our kids know what's going on, but we don't really know what our kids are thinking, and they may not really know the facts of what is true versus what they are thinking in their mind. You know, can I get it from just sitting in this room? You know, can I get it from? I mean, they may not know. They're probably more fearful in certain ways than we would want them to be.
So that's a great opportunity for family discussion of, let's talk about the facts.
Yes.
And let's talk about what we believe. And we know that God is in control, and we know we're going to be okay, that we can rely on our faith. But in family time, it's a great time to put that emphasis on being together, find new games to play together, play hopscotch outside. Sidewalk chalk is a fun thing. I saw some cute photos some friends of mine that live in Columbus now made, and they were just drawing silly things like balloons on the driveway and then laying down beside it like they were holding the balloons. You know, just do funny stuff. Have a good time together. It's a great time.
You mentioned facts. And so here's a question. I mean, even if you're not at home watching the news, our kids know that there's something going on, right? I mean, you go to the grocery store, there's no meat, you know, anywhere to be found. Kid walks into the pantry and sees, you know,
no Pop-Tarts.
No Pop-Tarts, but 4 pallets of toilet paper, right? I mean, they realize that things are different. So as far as facts are concerned, what would you advise a parent to say to a child? I mean, why things are so abnormal right now? You know, they're hearing about COVID-19. What do you tell a child about that?
Go ahead, Lisa.
It doesn't matter.
Go ahead.
I always look at things in a historical aspect, you know, and you talked about this a few weeks ago about how the church survived the Spanish flu.
That's right.
And so it's cool to talk about, look, historically, we've had these things happen. You may not remember the swine flu or the bird flu, and, you know, it wasn't necessarily a fun time and people got sick, but we're just going to, you know, wash our hands and we're going to take precautions, and we're going to try to stay well. Just being positive about it, exuding that positiveness, don't you think? I think it
so,
rubs off on our kids.
Yeah, because our kids immediately sense what we feel. And if I portray that I'm afraid, then my kids are going to be afraid.
That's right.
If I portray that, you know, the Lord is in control of this, and that, you know, yes, like you said, bring it back to history and facts. We've had these things in the past. The reason why we're taking precaution now is because we don't have a vaccine yet for this, and you give them examples. You know, we used to not have a vaccine for this or that, and now we do, and now that disease is not even around anymore. We don't even worry about it. And so we're able to give them the faithfulness of God and how He's been faithful in the past, but also with the facts of history that we've survived these things, just like Lisa said. And this is just another example that you happen to be living in.
Right. That's a great point. You know, I was at home with my kids last night and was watching something on TV, and I got to wondering how many people are there in Mississippi. And so I Googled it. That's the source of all information, right? So I Googled what's the population of Mississippi and found that in 2018, at least, that's what they gave me, was almost 3 million. And so I think this morning there were 320 cases of COVID-19 here in Mississippi. And of course, you know, one case is too many for sure.
Right.
But when you do the math of 320 cases out of 3 million people, you know, that's far less than even just 1%. And again, one case is too many cases. I'm not minimizing anything.
Exactly.
But I think it comes back to your point of with our children, fact versus feeling, or even fact versus fear.
Correct.
I guess something like that would be helpful in
Yes.
communicating to your children, listen, it doesn't mean that every single person is going to get this. It doesn't mean that
Yes.
if you eat your spinach, you're really going to come down with something.
Right,
Sure.
right.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think that you sharing that number with me this morning was comforting.
Yeah. Sure.
You know, just to think that 3 million people are in our state and 300 something, like you said, it's not to minimize or to say that those numbers are not going to grow.
Sure.
Because the experts say that those numbers are going to grow.
Right.
But it's also to not over dramatize what's going on so that children can actually get a real perspective on what's
Yes.
happening instead of a fearful one that every person around them has it, you
Right.
know.
And so take that number and make it relevant to them. How many children are in your classroom at school?
Yeah.
25. You're one
Yeah.
of 25. You know, and look at, well, what is 3 million? You know, kindergartners have 100 day, you know.
Yeah.
And so they celebrate that. Make that number relevant to depending on the age of the child so that they
Exactly.
get, wow, this really isn't a very big number.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
makes great sense.
And some kids, you know, I think with boys especially love numbers. It seems that they like to have a, you know, kind of like
Concrete.
concrete factual thing. I know my son does. So
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful to him.
Here's a question that came in. I love this question, and so thank you for sending them in. Please continue to send them in. But a question from a parent says, my 5-year-old daughter is struggling with no longer seeing her friends. She's frustrated and sad that she can't play with them. Lots of tears, lots. Suggestions on how or what to say or explain to her.
I will. I think that you do as much as you can. You let them FaceTime and talk. They've got so many things now online that I'm not even familiar with that people are using. And Zoom, I think, is one thing they call it. But we're all familiar with FaceTime because we've had that for such a long time. I would let her do that as often as she wanted, kind of set up times of the day to say this is going to be our schedule, and you know, let's call so and so today, and late this afternoon we'll call someone else. And I think that still within reason we can see each other, just not in close contact. We haven't been told do not go anywhere. We've been told to have social distance and to be wise.
Right.
So I think that you could still have them drive up in the driveway and wave at each other and say, you know, hey, what are you doing? And maybe even sit, you know, in the car and them outside and talk for a while. Because as long as it's within the guidelines of what we've been told with the social distance, I think it's safe to do.
I think Shannon has great ideas, but I always think Shannon has great ideas. I also think to add on top of that is to help her by being hopeful.
Yeah.
I realize you can't see your children, your friends right now.
Right.
But it will happen soon.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one day we'll be able to look back and say, look what all we did at home. Look at all the games we played. And gosh, we had to do school at home. But we got through this, and it was so great when we got to see our friends again. So just that reassurance of it's coming, it's going to happen. Now, I'm going to
Yes.
stick something in, though, on the end of that question to kind of talk about days. I'm a firm believer, and if my kids are watching this, they're laughing because they know what I'm going to say. I'm a firm believer with children in structure. Children, I believe, crave structure. They want to know what's coming next,
Yes.
what's going to happen. And think about it. You know, they ask, what are we going to have for supper? Which nightgown am I going to wear tonight? Or, you know, do I have to sleep in a pull-up tonight? Or, you know, depending on what age they are, they have a lot of questions. And so as parents, if we have some structure, so if you are at home and you're doing homeschool, set up times. Okay, this is breakfast time, and this is snack time, and this is when we're going to do our math, and this is when we're going to do our reading. But in between, we're going to have outside time. I have a friend who has several children at home that are all high school age, and she sent me a picture that they're all outside doing their work. And so, you know, find a happy way to do it, an enjoyable way. Some kids concentrate better if they're outside. Some may have too many distractions and not be able to do that.
Right.
But so set up a structure, set up a schedule. Those things, believe it or not, as much trouble as it might seem, will save anxiety on your children's part in the long run because they crave predictability.
Yeah.
You make a great point, and of course you're a former school teacher as well, so you
It
kind of
comes
have
out.
you have a little bit of both. But another question that's been submitted, you know, almost every family now with school-age children have been kind of thrust into learning how to do school at home.
Yeah.
And even though the schools, I think, are doing a great job of
Yes.
resourcing us as parents and providing things such as online instruction and even probably making things not quite as hard as they could. And I think teachers have been very gracious with that. But for the parent who wasn't prepared for that, right?
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of parents out there, maybe they're having to work from home, and now their children are doing school at home. And so, you know, one thing about parents is we all want to be the best parent in the world, and none of us think that we're any good at it at all, right? And so it just kind of, all this just kind of adds to our feeling of we're just not very good. How would you advise a parent to handle that balance of making sure that we're giving time to our children while not neglecting work?
Right.
I mean, that's a new balance because
it is.
we're all in the house together. So what
Exactly.
would your advice be on that?
I think partly what you just said, Lisa, is involved in that, having some kind of schedule, and helping them to understand this is the time where Mama does this, and this is the time where we do this together. I have to do that when I have phone sessions and things like that. You know, you have to be able to set a boundary, and if Mom has to get on a conference call, or if Dad's home with the child and he has to get on a conference call, then you have to be able to say this is my time right now, and I can't play or talk because I've got to work. But again, preparing them and giving them kids like to have an idea of, well, then when will it happen?
Right.
If you will give them at 2 o'clock, we're going to work together on your stuff,
Right.
then a lot of times they will stop the nagging, the whining, the
Yes.
begging, if you will give them a time. If you say in the morning at 10, we're going to work on schoolwork together, I guarantee you, most children, 10 o'clock, they're saying to you, remember, you said 10 o'clock, we're going to work.
Right.
They are
They do.
they're very much like that. So if we can give them a schedule and say now, but between 1 and 2, Mom has to do her thing, and you're going to get to play outside,
Yeah.
or you're going to get to whatever it is they love. Sit in here and do art.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. You know, we've talked about children a little bit, but you referenced Mama, and so Mama and Daddy. Life has
Yeah.
changed
Yeah,
Yes.
for us as adults too.
right.
And we as adults sometimes have our own anxiety.
Yes.
And so a question that's been submitted is, how do I handle my anxiety when life has just changed so much in the last week or so? Because again, we want to put on the best face we can
Right.
for our spouse and for our best face we can for our kids, but we struggle too.
Absolutely.
So how would you advise a parent to handle that?
You want to start? No, me?
Go ahead.
Well, gosh, there's a lot of ways. And so it's different for everybody. But I do think, just starting out, I know you're going to say, okay, every therapist says breathe. And every therapist probably does say breathe. But to just stop and breathe a second gives your brain a chance to catch up with those anxious feelings. And oxygen is always a good thing for the brain. So, physiologically, that's true. We know that. To just stop and breathe. And many times, those of us that are believers will stop and breathe and pray. And even if it's just, okay, Lord, help me with this whiny 3-year-old or whatever's going on. Help me with my husband who's in a bad mood because he got chewed out by his boss because he wasn't on the conference call long enough or whatever because of working from home, or. And so we have to ask for patience, and God will give us those supernatural things. But I go back to structure again because I think we might be relaxed during this time and we might say, oh, it doesn't matter if we have a bedtime. It doesn't matter if we have that time that we get up. I think it's good to still keep, if you're school-age children, keep those school routines going, because they will go back. And bedtime for children is then a great time for parents to have alone time. And I think as for mama and daddy, they need to be able to talk to each other about what they're worried about with their jobs. And who do you go to? We go to our spouse. Now, if you're a single mom, you need alone time, you need downtime. You need time to get in the Word, time to soak in the bathtub without somebody banging on the bathroom door.
Right.
So I hate to go back to the scheduling and the structure, but there's a reason that so much of that works out so well.
I think too, you know, you can learn and do based on a lot of times what has worked in the past. So if you're a person who has struggled with anxiety at different times in your life, you can look back and say, okay, what did I learn then? What worked for me back then? What was the thing that really helped me the most? And generally, a lot of us know what kind of helps us. Some of us, it's music. I think we should play our praise music because it gives an air of hopefulness and joy into our spirit. So at home, I think that's something that we can do. I think that also we can be mindful of. Some people need to, we had talked about this earlier, write scripture out.
Scripture, yes.
My niece has struggled with anxiety in the past, and what worked for her is to shut her eyes and just out loud say scripture over and over and over until that anxiety feeling kind of dissipates.
And closing eyes is good, I'll just stick that in, because you're blocking out all the other things that are stimulating you.
Correct.
So you can close your eyes and focus on, I'm okay.
Yes, yes, and saying those positive things inside instead of the negative things. You know, we'll catch ourselves saying the negative things over and over. This is terrible. It's going to get worse. I'm scared. If we say those things over and over, that's what we start feeling and portraying. So if we change that and change our self-talk and say, this is going to be over soon. Everything's going to be okay. The Lord's going to take care of us, and change into those positive statements that we repeat over and over that dissipate some of that anxiety. And knowing what has helped you with anxiety in the past.
Right.
You know, is it talking to someone? Is it, you know, what is it? What is it that's helped you? And I know for me, music helps me. And putting on, you know, praise music just gives an air, a different presence, just the Lord's presence there to help reduce some of that anxiety.
You know, I'm certainly not a counselor, but from a pastoral perspective, you know, here at First Baptist this past Sunday, you know, we're asking members of First Baptist Jackson to read 3 Psalms a day.
Right.
And after every sermon, you know, I always think, boy, I wish I would have said this, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I have thought over the last couple of days that I wish that I would have said was that I read somewhere the benefit and have tried to practice that with each of the Psalms that you read, really contemplate on what God is saying about Himself.
Yeah.
And then, for instance, this morning in my quiet time, I like to journal my prayers and journal some of what I read. And so, with each of the 3 Psalms, I typed out one thing, one verse where God revealed something to me about Himself.
Yes.
And then my prayer was a response prayer, really beginning with, God, I praise you for what you showed me here in Psalm 4. And I praise you for this that I learned about you in Psalm 5. And I praise you for this that I learned about you in Psalm 6.
Right.
And I think sometimes we have a tendency to judge the Scripture through the lenses of our circumstances, whereas we need to try to learn to judge our circumstances through the lenses of Scripture.
Right.
And for me, because I struggle with anxiety, I mean, I told y'all I
me
have
too.
OCD. I mean, I struggle with anxiety. And so for me, that's just a practice that's helpful of kind of coming back and remembering fact. But when I see these great things about God, reminds me of who He is and kind of gives me that strength for the day. And I've noticed we've, on our church Instagram site, we're having a person post something that they've learned about God through the 3 Psalms a Day plan.
Right.
And just today, I was looking at the one that was posted that Jim Spikes did a great job.
He did.
And we had lots of comments, and some of the comments had to do with, boy, that really helped me today. So I think that's kind of what you're saying is finding those things, and Scripture certainly is one of them.
Yes.
That just reminds us of truth.
Gets us back our focus
Gets us
right.
back, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and the technical aspect, when you're dealing with anxiety, or just we can talk about worries and fears, and fear being a stronghold over us, is something called ANTS. It's an acronym. I like acronyms because it helps me remember stuff because I have that problem. So automatic negative thoughts. We all have automatic negative thoughts. And we want to stomp out the ants. If you're going on a picnic,
great.
you don't want ants.
That's right.
Automatic negative thoughts.
great.
So these are ways to get rid of those.
Yeah,
And the Bible tells us to capture our thoughts.
yeah, absolutely.
And so,
And we can't help it that we get them.
no, we're human.
We're human, and so they're going to come into our mind. It's what we do with them after that.
That's right.
If we let them grow and build into a snowball, you know, avalanche, then we're in
Right.
trouble. If we stomp
Right.
them out, like Lisa said, then we feel a little bit better and we feel more in control rather than completely out of control with the thoughts.
And I'm sure there's another question, but see, that's a real important one right there that you just said, Shannon. So I'm going to reiterate it.
Okay.
We're not taught this. I didn't learn it until I was at least 50 probably, that we can control our thoughts. We can
Wow.
control our minds.
Wow.
We're not taught that. And we can do that in a godly way.
Great, that's great. I think about the Scripture, Colossians 3:2, set your mind on things above,
Yes.
not on things on the earth, or
Right.
Paul tells us in Romans 12, not to be conformed to this world, but be
Yes.
transformed by the renewing of our minds.
Exactly.
And as you said,
Perfect.
there's responsibility
It
on
is.
us
It
there
is. That's
to
right.
put ourselves in position to renew our minds.
right.
Yes, Isaiah 26:3. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what it says too. If we'll keep our mind focused and steadfast, trusting in Him, then He's going to keep us in perfect peace.
Right.
So there's responsibility there to us.
Wow.
That He is going to do His part in keeping us in
right.
perfect peace, but we've got to do our part in keeping our mind steadfastly trusting in Him.
Wow. I've got one more question, and we're going to have to wrap up.
Okay.
I appreciate y'all meeting with me today, and I appreciate y'all just kind of joining in on our conversation. It's been good for me. I've learned a lot, and hopefully you have as well. But one final question that was submitted, I want to make sure that we get in. What are some things that you would avoid talking about with your elementary age kids regarding COVID-19? Essentially, how far is too far? What would you avoid?
Elementary age. So I would consider that to be like 5 to 11.
I would think so.
About
yeah.
that?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Well, I think the first step is to look at what do they understand, because kids are different.
Absolutely.
And you know as well as I do, all of you that are parents, if you have more than one child, they're all different. And so to think about them personally as a child and to know what bothers them, and you know this as a mom or a dad, what
That's right.
upsets them, what they can handle, or maybe what you think they can handle. But I think it is our job to protect them. I think it's okay to be real if they say, Mom, are people dying? You know, and to talk about, yes, you know, someone can be sick, but many people are living. So you don't have to dwell on the negative.
Right.
That's
Again,
right.
flip it into that positive.
True.
But I think a parent knows best. You know, I remember taking my children to a pediatrician, and I remember saying, I don't have a medical degree, you know. And my pediatrician was Dr. Sistrunk, who is a member here. He probably watches online every Sunday. And he used to say, Lisa, parents know their kids better than anybody. You know your child better than I do. And so you know that answer.
Yeah, and I think that if you sit down and ask them the question, you know, baby, what do you think about this coronavirus stuff? Do you want to ask mom any questions? Then that allows them, especially school-age children who are used to asking questions at school and things like that.
Yeah.
You can't really do that with a 3-year-old, but we're talking about school-age children. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
And how do you feel about it? Then you get a chance to say, do you have any questions for me? And then that way you know what's going on in their little mind that they're really wanting to know that maybe they haven't said. And that's better, I think, than over-informing. Because sometimes we have a tendency to do the lecture thing and we over-inform and then they feel overwhelmed and sometimes worse than they did before.
Yeah.
So I think maybe if you give them the power to ask the question, what do you think about this? How do you feel about this? And then if they say, they ask a question, then you kind of know age appropriately, and because it's your child, like Lisa said, what it is they can handle, what it is they're needing.
Right.
And then you put that positive spin on that.
That's right. Maybe if we get a chance to talk about this more, we can talk about what to look for if you think your child is fearful or whatever.
Absolutely. That's a great way for us to segue to an ending. And so next week we can talk more about what to look for in your child. What are some signs of anxiety or depression that maybe you want to try to be able to identify early on. And so we hope that you'll join us next Tuesday at 2 o'clock as we continue our series, Navigating Our New Normal. I do want to let you know, I know some of you maybe with work, you're not able to watch live, and so you may be watching this a little bit later. Feel free, though, to send us your questions. We would love to be able to try to address your questions the very best we can. You can go to the church website and find one of the email addresses there and send us your questions so we can help you any way we can. I also want you to know, particularly those of you who are members at First Baptist Church Jackson, with your membership, you are allowed to visit Summit Counseling 6 times free of charge. And so I want you to know about that incredible resource. Listen, this is a unique and honestly kind of a difficult time for all of us. And maybe you want to just come in and talk to somebody who will give you biblical guidance on how to handle the difficult things that you're dealing with. And I want you to know that that's available for you. You can call the church office and we can get you in contact with them. So I want to thank you again so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next Tuesday at 2 o'clock.